Imagine standing on a grand festival platform, surrounded by dazzling illusions that crackle with hidden danger. In a heartbeat, those illusions shatter, and real attackers swarm in with plasma rifles blazing. Our hero, Orion Carter, is forced to fight for his life and the safety of his new family, Rhina and Amara. That explosive showdown where an Earth engineer outsmarts rogue Aravex warriors is just one of the jaw-dropping moments in this epic sci-fi saga. Curious to see how a seemingly ordinary outsider becomes a vital protector on an alien world? You're in the right place. This is only a glimpse of the thrilling confrontations, political gambits, and heartwarming bonds that define our story. Stick around to discover every twist and turn, because the final outcome is more surprising than you might expect. And while you're here, please subscribe to our channel and support us for more exciting sci-fi adventures. Orion Carter's small apartment in downtown Seattle was dimly lit by the neon glare of the city. On an ordinary evening, he might have been hunched over a circuit board or scribbling blueprints for his next engineering project. But tonight was anything but ordinary. The holographic projector on his coffee table hummed to life without warning, emitting a pale blue glow that caught Orion's eye immediately. He set down his cup of black coffee, bitter just the way he liked it, and leaned forward, heart pounding in his chest. A figure began to take shape in shimmering cyan lines. Before the form was even fully realized, Orion's throat went dry. He knew that face, those angled features, and those piercing, metallic gray eyes. It was Drex. 6 months had passed since Orion had last heard from his friend. Drex had returned to his home planet of Aravex under mysterious circumstances involving some urgent clan business. There had been no calls, no messages, just an unsettling silence. Orion had begun to fear the worst. Even so, he never could have predicted the sight now materializing before him. Drex's hologram, which looked and sounded as though his friend were standing right there in the living room. The alien's skin was a muted emerald hue, as was typical of his people, and his voice carried that deep, resonant tone Orion could have picked out anywhere. "If you're seeing this message," Drex's image began, "it means I'm dead." The casual certainty in Drex's tone sent a chill down Orion's spine. "I'm sorry, my friend. I wanted to tell you more, but there wasn't time. And now everything I feared has come to pass." Orion gripped the edges of his coffee table, knuckles turning white. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the hologram. In a painful flash, he remembered the day Drex left Earth, the rushed farewells, and that promise to stay in touch. Yet that call never came. Now, the only explanation was this recorded message from beyond the grave. Drex's recording continued, "There's a responsibility I must ask you to bear, Orion. Not just my possessions, not just the estate, but my sisters, Rhina and Amara. By the ancient laws of our Rin Shaddai clan, their safety and status fall to whoever inherits my place as protector. On Aravex, that means husband as much as guardian." The word husband made Orion lurch with disbelief. His mind spun, conjuring wild images of archaic laws on an alien world. Could such a thing be real? "I know," Drex said, his holographic eyes seeming to lock onto Orion's. "This is overwhelming, but I trust no one else with this. The forces that took my life will come for them. They need someone resourceful, compassionate, and strong enough to stand against tradition gone wrong. And Orion, that someone is you." The message ended abruptly, leaving Orion in stunned silence. He reached out a shaking hand and paused the projector, wanting to replay the last few words again and again. But he couldn't. He felt as if an anvil had dropped in his stomach. The phone on his desk buzzed, capturing his attention. He glanced over, seeing only coordinates and a countdown. 5 hours, 58 minutes, and 37 seconds. For a moment, Orion simply stared at his buzzing phone, the screen's glow reflecting off his wide brown eyes. He half expected to wake up from a strange dream. After all, how could a single hologram turn his entire life upside down? The notion that Drex, a brilliant Aravex engineer and Orion's closest collaborator at the Interplanetary Coalition, was not only gone, but had also named Orion as the guardian husband to 2 alien women was almost too much to process. But the phone continued its silent countdown, mocking his inertia with each passing second. 5 hours and 57 minutes now. Something about the inexorable nature of that timer jolted Orion into action. Drex had trusted him with something monumental. Sitting around in shock wouldn't honor that trust. Orion swallowed hard, stood up, and moved toward his bedroom closet with resolute steps. He mentally listed what he might need for a journey to another planet, though no earthly travel kit could possibly prepare him for the unknown hazards of Aravex. He yanked a duffel bag from the top shelf and began tossing in essentials. Clothes durable enough for varied climates, a portable toolkit that had been his pride and joy ever since he built his first drone at the age of 12, and a handful of personal mementos, because who knew when he might see his apartment again? It felt ludicrous to be doing something so mundane as packing socks and extra shirts while grappling with the prospect of an interplanetary marriage. While haphazardly stuffing items into the bag, Orion's tablet on the desk chimed, indicating a new message. He rushed over, curiosity piqued. The screen displayed a compressed file labeled Aravex Cultural Primer. Another ping. Basic Rinshadai legal documents. A third, language module, Aravex Standard. Orion let out a tense laugh. It seemed Drex, even in death, had thought ahead. The messages kept coming, each data packet containing vital information about a world Orion only knew from brief, secondhand stories. He remembered how Drex used to talk about Aravex, a planet of shimmering crystal spires and advanced biotechnology, where clan traditions ran as deeply as the planet's luminous lakes. The knowledge had once fascinated Orion in a casual, intellectual way. Now it felt like the key to surviving and fulfilling a life-or-death promise to a man he still couldn't believe was truly gone. Time slipped by in a frenzy of study and preparation. Each file Orion skimmed offered a glimpse into a society both beautiful and daunting. He read about the clan-based system. The Rinshadai people valued loyalty and lineage above all else. Marriages sometimes served political ends or upheld familial duties. The role of protector was especially crucial in noble families, with intricately woven laws that mandated care for vulnerable members. In this case, vulnerable meant Drex's sisters, left without any direct male heir from their own bloodline. At last, the countdown fell below 30 minutes. Heart-pounding, Orion slung his overstuffed duffel across his shoulder and hurried out the door. Whatever was waiting for him at the coordinates, he would soon find out. A single desperate thought flashed through his mind. I hope I'm not making the biggest mistake of my life. Night had settled over Seattle by the time Orion reached the deserted waterfront lot, indicated in the cryptic messages. Streetlights cast elongated shadows across the cracked pavement. The sound of distant ships on Puget Sound mingled with the hum of overhead drones scanning the city's perimeter. Orion glanced at his phone. 5 minutes remaining. A swirl of nerves knotted in his stomach. Nothing about this location looked promising. There was no sign of a spacecraft, no neon blue landing lights. He wondered if the entire message had been some elaborate hoax. Then a dull, mechanical whir made him whirl around. Emerging from behind a stack of disused shipping crates was a silvery pod no larger than a small car. It hovered a few feet above the ground, its surface reflecting the moonlight like liquid mercury. A single hatch hissed open, flooding the lot with a stark white glow. Mr. Orion Carter, a computerized voice greeted. Authorization confirmed. Please board for immediate transfer to Aravex. The voice was calm, polite. Too polite. For a second, Orion weighed his options. Turning and running crossed his mind, but then he thought of Drex's final words, the unspoken plea in that recorded gaze. Not a chance, Orion told himself. With a sharp exhale, he jogged toward the pod, stepping inside carefully. The interior was surprisingly spacious, at least from a design standpoint, though not necessarily roomy in the conventional sense. One sleek seat molded itself to his body as he sat, while subtle lines of soft lighting traced the walls. There were no visible controls, just a swirl of interactive holograms. The hatch sealed shut with a whisper, plunging Orion into an otherworldly stillness. Initialization of quantum transfer in progress, the same computerized voice chimed. Please remain seated and refrain from moving during molecular deconstruction. Molecular what? Orion managed, feeling a spike of terror. But before he could fully process what was happening, his skin prickled with static. The world around him blurred, and a searing light enveloped every inch of his consciousness. For a split second, it felt as if he were falling and floating at the same time, torn apart molecule by molecule and hurled across the universe. Then, just as quickly, the sensation ended. The pod hatch slid open, revealing a sight Orion would have thought possible only in science fiction. A sky tinted with two fading suns, the horizon draped in bands of purple and gold. Luminous spires towered in the distance, looking as if they were carved from translucent gemstones. Hovering walkways intersected those spires, dotted with Aravex citizens whose skin tones ranged from pale jade to deep sapphire. Sleek vehicles glided smoothly overhead, leaving shimmering energy trails in their wake. Trying not to gape like a tourist, Orion stepped out of the pod. The air felt thinner than Earth's, subtly charged with an electric tang. Before he could fully take in his new surroundings, a tall figure approached, dressed in what appeared to be ceremonial armor plated with glowing lines of biotech. The figure's mint-green skin and solemn eyes marked him as one of Drex's people. "Greetings, Orion Carter," the alien said in a measured tone, inclining his head. "I am Alaris, sentinel of the Rin Shaddai City District. I have been instructed to escort you to Drex's family estate." The estate in question sat at the heart of Aravex's capital, nestled among crystalline arches and labyrinthine gardens that defied any Earth architecture Orion had seen. Alaris guided him onto a floating platform that whisked them through the city at a brisk pace. Orion tried to memorize the swirling symbols that flashed on nearby translucent screens, but the script was too elaborate to decode at a glance. He caught the stares of countless Aravexians as they passed, some curious, others openly hostile. The presence of an off-worlder must have been rare indeed. "You are the first human to be named a protector under our laws," Alaris remarked, as if reading Orion's thoughts. "There will be scrutiny. The Rin Shaddai clan is ancient and proud." Orion nodded, remembering the thick legal documents he had barely skimmed. He still struggled to wrap his head around the phrase, "husband to alien sisters." Half of him wanted to turn around and demand a return to Earth. The other half felt a surge of determination, a sense of responsibility to honor Drex's last wish. After all, he and Drex had been more than colleagues. They had been confidants, forging prototypes at the Interplanetary Coalition labs that combined Earth's mechanical ingenuity with Aravex's advanced biotech. The platform descended gently before an expansive compound. Large crystalline walls pulsed with a faint luminescence, and sensor arrays disguised as floral vines perched along the perimeter. Intricate gates slid open, revealing a courtyard where two female figures stood. Orion recognized them immediately from Drex's recording. Rena, the taller and older sister, stood with a bearing reminiscent of a seasoned soldier. Shoulders back, posture steady, every inch of her exuding a formidable presence. Her skin was a rich emerald shade, and her long platinum hair was woven into a complex braid. Next to her was Amara, who radiated a softer aura. Her hair fell in dark, wavy coils, and her deep blue eyes held a quiet depth. She wore flowing robes that shifted colors as she moved, each hue reflecting the ambient light in mesmerizing patterns. Alaris stepped aside, murmuring formal introductions. Then Rena's gaze locked onto Orion, scanning him from head to toe as if he were a piece of substandard equipment. "So," she said in a crisp, low tone, "this is what Drex sent us. You barely look like you can hold a blade." Orion bristled but held his tongue. He recalled the precise instructions in Drex's files about showing respect. He dipped his head in a subtle bow. "I'm sorry for your loss," he began carefully. "Drex was a friend, and he entrusted me with your protection." He swallowed hard, forcing himself to meet her steely gaze. "Though I'll admit, I'm still trying to understand exactly what that entails." Amara stepped forward, laying a gentle hand on Rena's arm. "We appreciate your condolences and your willingness to travel so far," she said, voice lilting with an accent Orion found both melodic and foreign. "But you must understand, by Rin Shaddai law, you are expected to assume a place in our household. That means acting as both guardian and partner." The words settled between them, thick with implication. Orion's mouth felt dry. I realize the gravity of it," he replied, though in truth his understanding was limited at best. His vision flicked from Rena's fierce eyes to Amara's calm appraisal. Despite the tension, he sensed an undercurrent of sorrow, an open wound from Drex's death. The estate's automated defenses finally roared to life, thanks to an override likely activated by Alaris or some other sentinel. Laser turrets emerged from hidden recesses in the ceiling, spraying precise beams that drove the remaining attackers back. The air filled with the acrid smell of scorched fabric and ozone from discharged energy cells. Within minutes, the estate's security forces closed in, and the intruders who weren't unconscious quickly surrendered. Panting, Orion steadied himself against a pillar. The swirling lights and blaring alarms created a nightmarish tableau that seemed surreal, even more so when he realized how real the danger had been. One misstep, and he or the sisters might have ended up dead. Rena wiped sweat from her brow, then spun to face Orion. Her voice shook with adrenaline. "You're not just talk," she remarked, still breathing heavily. "Good to know." Amara approached, a calming aura surrounding her now that her energy shield was no longer deployed. "Are you hurt?" she asked Orion, scanning him for injuries. He shook his head, though he was sure bruises would appear by morning from the abrupt scuffle. Alaris strode in through a side entrance, accompanied by more estate guards. "They're contained," he announced curtly, his lips curved into a slight frown. The intruders were outfitted with advanced tech, far beyond what common thieves would possess. Rhina's expression was grim, which means they were sent with a specific goal. They knew exactly where our defenses were weakest. Orion felt a shudder climb his spine. Someone wanted to test how well the estate and I could handle a direct assault. From the corner of his eye, he caught Amara studying him. The depth of her gaze was disconcerting, as though she were peeling back the layers of Orion's psyche to understand his motivations. He met her eyes, and she offered a small nod of gratitude. A quiet moment passed, filled only by the crackling of damaged armor plates and the faint hiss of automated vents clearing smoke from the air. Then Alaris broke the silence. "Lady Rena, Lady Amara, the Council of Aravex has been notified of this incident. They request an audience with your newly appointed protector." His glance flicked to Orion. "They are intrigued." Orion swallowed, knowing that intrigued could easily translate to suspicious in the political labyrinth he'd been reading about. Rena turned to him. "We'll have to present you to them. They will want to test your worthiness in a more formal setting." She said test with a certain ominous finality. There was no question in Orion's mind. They would not be pitting him against mere scripted rituals. Aravex's council had the power to decide his fate, and that of Rena and Amara, under archaic laws he barely comprehended. Amara's tone was gentle but unwavering. "We should rest and prepare. The council doesn't waste time. We'll be summoned by dawn. Until then, Orion, take this victory for what it is, a sign you might succeed here, but be wary. This was just the beginning." The estate's automated defenses finally roared to life, thanks to an override likely activated by Alaris or some other sentinel. Laser turrets emerged from hidden recesses in the ceiling, spraying precise beams that drove the remaining attackers back. The air filled with the acrid smell of scorched fabric and ozone from discharged energy cells. Within minutes, the estate's security forces closed in, and the intruders who weren't unconscious quickly surrendered. Panting, Orion steadied himself against a pillar. The swirling lights and blaring alarms created a nightmarish tableau that seemed surreal, even more so when he realized how real the danger had been. One misstep, and he or the sisters might have ended up dead. Rena wiped sweat from her brow, then spun to face Orion. Her voice shook with adrenaline. "You're not just talk," she remarked, still breathing heavily. "Good to know." Amara approached, a calming aura surrounding her, now that her energy shield was no longer deployed. "Are you hurt?" she asked Orion, scanning him for injuries. He shook his head, though he was sure bruises would appear by morning from the abrupt scuffle. Alaris strode in through a side entrance, accompanied by more estate guards. "They're contained," he announced curtly, his lips curved into a slight frown. The intruders were outfitted with advanced tech, far beyond what common thieves would possess. Rena's expression was grim, which means they were sent with a specific goal. They knew exactly where our defenses were weakest. Orion felt a shudder climb his spine. Someone wanted to test how well the estate and I could handle a direct assault. From the corner of his eye, he caught Amara studying him. The depth of her gaze was disconcerting, as though she were peeling back the layers of Orion's psyche to understand his motivations. He met her eyes, and she offered a small nod of gratitude. A quiet moment passed, filled only by the crackling of damaged armor plates and the faint hiss of automated vents clearing smoke from the air. Then Alaris broke the silence. Lady Rena, Lady Amara, the Council of Aravex has been notified of this incident. They request an audience with your newly appointed protector. His glance flicked to Orion. They are intrigued. Orion swallowed, knowing that intrigued could easily translate to suspicious in the political labyrinth he'd been reading about. Rena turned to him. We'll have to present you to them. They will want to test your worthiness in a more formal setting. She said test with a certain ominous finality. There was no question in Orion's mind. They would not be pitting him against mere scripted rituals. Aravex's council had the power to decide his fate, and that of Rena and Amara, under archaic laws he barely comprehended. Amara's tone was gentle but unwavering. We should rest and prepare. The council doesn't waste time. We'll be summoned by dawn. Until then, Orion, take this victory for what it is, a sign you might succeed here. But be wary. This was just the beginning. Night settled over the Rin Shaddai estate in a hush of subdued lighting and careful watchfulness. The once majestic corridors now felt laden with tension, like the calm after a fierce storm. Orion found himself in a modest yet elegant guest suite designed for high-ranking visitors. The bed was carved from a single, shimmering crystal slab, topped with intricately woven linens that shimmered in subtle patterns. He ran a tired hand over his face. Welcome to Aravex, he thought, surveying the alien elegance around him. Nothing says home sweet home like a life-or-death battle upon arrival. Despite his exhaustion, sleep refused to come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw phantoms of the firefight, flashes of plasma, the crackle of that short-circuit device, the startled expression on one attacker's face. As the echoes of adrenaline gradually ebbed, a sense of unreality flooded in. Could he, a mechanical engineer from Earth, truly fulfill the role of a protector to two alien noblewomen? The entire notion teetered on the edge of the absurd. Yet he kept coming back to Drex's holographic plea. His friend had trusted him against all odds, despite all cultural differences. An electronic chime roused Orion from his inner turmoil. A translucent screen flickered to life on the wall, revealing Amara's face. She wore an expression of polite concern. My apologies for disturbing your rest, Orion, she said softly. But I sensed your distress. May I enter? In the short time since he had arrived, Orion had grown used to Aravex's more fluid sense of privacy, particularly among noble families who shared living spaces governed by advanced technology. He granted her permission. The door slid aside, and Amara stepped in, carrying a small orb that emitted a soothing blue glow. She placed it on the bedside table, and the entire room filled with a gentle, calming light, like moonbeams rippling across water. Thank you, Orion managed, blinking at the orb. I could use some calm right now. You fought well today, she said, seating herself on a gracefully curved stool. Bravely, too. It was the first time we've seen you in a life-threatening situation. I wouldn't say I'm proud of the violence, he answered honestly, but I'm glad we got through it in one piece. He paused, thinking of Drex. I want to honor your brother's faith in me. Amara's gaze grew distant for a moment. Drex believed in forging bonds beyond mere blood and tradition. When he studied with the Coalition on Earth, he often spoke of synergy, how combining our world's technologies and perspectives could strengthen us both. But some here on Aravex fear outside influence. They see it as contamination rather than evolution. Orion nodded, recalling the heated debates back at the Coalition labs, where Earth engineers like him questioned the closed-mindedness of certain Aravex clans. Do you think that's why Drex was... He trailed off, not wanting to say killed, even though the evidence in the data file suggested foul play. Amara's expression tightened. Our planet's politics can be as ruthless as they are beautiful. My hope is that you'll help Rina and me navigate these treacherous waters, not as a dominating force, but as a partner who brings something new and balanced. He took a moment, letting her words sink in. The color-changing orb on his bedside table pulsed softly, as though echoing the rhythms of their conversation. He thought of the vow he'd made to Drex, of the near-impossible situation he now inhabited. Whether or not he believed in the ancient laws, they were real here, and they were absolute. Failing to uphold them could mean losing not just the trust of Rena and Amara, but their very protection under clan law. Finally, he spoke. I may not fully understand Aravex yet, or the customs of the Rin Shaddai clan, but I promise I won't let you down. Whatever it takes, I'll face these council tests. A small, hopeful smile curved Amara's lips. Then rest, Orion Carter. Dawn arrives quickly, and with it the first of many trials. Rena and I will stand beside you, but you must pass these challenges by your own merit. As she slipped out of the room, the lights dimmed again. Alone with the tiny glow of the calming orb, Orion let out a slow breath. Tomorrow he would stand before the Council of Aravex. He would face his first real trial as a recognized protector of the Rin Shaddai sisters. And while a knot of fear still nestled in his gut, another feeling mingled with it now. Determination. If Drex believed in him enough to entrust Rena and Amara's futures to him, then Orion had no choice but to rise to the occasion. For better or worse, he was no longer just an Earth engineer. He was a guardian in an alien land, responsible for a family not his own, yet bound to him by an unbreakable promise. Dawn broke over the Rin Shaddai estate with a subdued hush, as if Aravex itself were holding its breath for what lay ahead. Orion couldn't help but marvel at the shifting violet hue of the sky, the light dancing off the crystalline structures in the distance. He found himself standing in an open courtyard beneath an ornate archway that glowed with bioluminescent tendrils. Rina and Amara flanked him, both dressed in the formal attire of their clan, robes and sashes patterned with swirling motifs that told stories of their lineage. Orion, by contrast, wore a set of ceremonial garments the sisters had hastily tailored for him overnight. The outfit was a deep obsidian color, trimmed with silver accents that caught the morning sun. It was slightly snug around his shoulders, but he tried to focus on steadying his breathing. He still felt bruised and exhausted from the previous night's clash with the intruders, yet there would be no respite. Today he would stand before the Aravex High Council for what Rena and Amara had ominously referred to as the Trial of Honor. A sleek transport craft descended into the courtyard, guided by circular discs of shimmering light that served as navigational beacons. The vehicle touched down with a gentle hum. From within stepped a cadre of solemn-faced attendants, each bearing the emblem of the council, 3 interlocking rings that glowed faintly. An attendant with jade-hued skin and golden eyes beckoned them forward. They've sent an official escort, Rena muttered, her tone tinged with disapproval. They want to make a display of this. Amara placed a reassuring hand on her sister's arm. Better a show than a covert attack, she said softly, then turned to Orion. Remember what we discussed. The Council holds immense sway over Aravex society. We must convince them you are not just an accident of Drex's will, but a worthy successor to his role. Orion nodded, swallowing hard. He climbed into the transport alongside the sisters, the attendants taking their seats up front. The craft rose smoothly, gliding above the estate grounds. He gazed out a crystal window, seeing the city unfold like a map of luminous spires, twisting walkways, and floating gardens. Aravex was breathtaking, a world that seemed to blend advanced technology and nature into a single living tapestry. Yet for all its beauty, tension knotted in his chest. The data files had warned that some influential members of the Council looked down on off-worlders, viewing them as a threat to Aravex's genetic and cultural purity. If they decided Orion was unworthy, they could nullify Drex's directive. That would leave Rena and Amara without formal clan protection. He remembered the gravity in Amara's voice. Being cast out here can be worse than any physical danger. We're nearly there, said the jade-skinned attendant, his voice echoing through the craft's interior. Ahead, a colossal building carved from opalescent stone rose into view, the seat of the High Council. It looked like a fusion of an ancient temple and a futuristic cathedral, with columns that seemed to ripple under the light of the 2 suns. Orion inhaled sharply. Whatever test lay beyond those polished arches, he couldn't afford to fail. The main chamber of the High Council resembled an amphitheater crowned by a massive semicircular dome. Dozens of council members sat in tiered rows, their robes displaying a riot of colors that signified their respective clans. The architecture combined the organic fluidity of Aravex style with the imposing grandeur of a legislative hall, Translucent panels on the walls displayed live feeds from across the city, hinting that this was a place where decisions of planetary importance were made. A hush fell as Orion, Rena, and Amara entered the chamber. A tall, statuesque figure with dark green skin and elongated silver markings stood at the forefront. His piercing gray eyes locked on Orion, and an unsettling feeling crept down Orion's spine. This had to be Zorak, the council member who had been quietly mentioned in Drex's files as an influential figure and a potential threat. "Orion Carter of Earth," Zorak announced, his voice reverberating through the cavernous hall. "You stand before the council today claiming the position of protector within the Rin Shaddai clan. By your late friend's directive, you are to safeguard Rena and Amara, thereby inheriting rights and responsibilities that once belonged to Drex." Orion bowed awkwardly, remembering too late that he was supposed to place his hand over his heart in the Aravex gesture of respect. Still, he held Zorak's intense stare. "I do not claim anything, Counselor," Orion said carefully, "except that I promised Drex I would protect his sisters. I'm here to fulfill that promise and to honor the laws of Aravex." Zorak's expression flickered, as though Orion's humble approach caught him off guard. He recovered swiftly, folding his arms across his broad chest. "Very well. We have prepared a trial as custom demands, a test of your integrity and fortitude. It is known as the Maze of Deliberations." He gestured to a series of archways behind him, each adorned with pulsating lights. "Enter, and you will face illusions derived from our collective psychic network. Pass, and you prove your mind cannot be easily manipulated. Fail, and your claim to the Rin Shaddai clan ends here." A ripple of whispers spread among the council members. Rena stepped forward, eyes narrowed. "This is a trial usually reserved for severe criminals seeking absolution or for someone contesting a major inheritance. Are you suggesting Orion is on trial for a crime?" Zorak arched an eyebrow. "Not at all. But the gravity of the situation demands the highest scrutiny. The fate of your house rests on him." He turned his gaze back to Orion. "You may begin whenever you are ready." Amara placed a gentle hand on Orion's arm. "Be cautious. The maze is a formidable psychic labyrinth. Everything you fear, regret, or long for can manifest there. But illusions can't truly harm you if you remember who you are." Orion mustered a tight smile. "Right. Remember who I am." He tried to steady his breathing. Across the chamber, he spotted council members craning forward in anticipation. It was a spectacle for them, a chance to see an off-worlder put to the test. Orion gave one more nod to Rena and Amara, then stepped toward the gateway. The instant he passed under the arch, the world dissolved into swirling lights. Reality fragmented. Orion found himself back on Earth, but in a distorted vision of his old laboratory at the Interplanetary Coalition. Except the fluorescent lights flickered ominously, and the walls seemed to bend inward. In the corner, he saw Drex hunched over a console, silent and still. A wave of relief hit Orion. Was Drex truly there? He approached, heartbeat thrumming. The figure turned, revealing Drex's familiar emerald green features and a soft smile. But something was off. His eyes were hollow and expressionless. "Why did you abandon me, Orion?" the figure asked in a hushed, accusatory tone. I didn't," Orion stammered, shaking his head. "You went back to Aravex. I never had a chance to help." He broke off, remembering the maze was supposed to be illusions. Yet Drex's pained expression tore at his heart. Guilt swelled within him. He had often wished he'd pried deeper, demanded to know more about Drex's urgent call back home. As if triggered by that regret, the environment twisted again. The lab shimmered into the Rin Shaddai estate under attack. But this time Orion stood paralyzed as hooded figures dragged Rena and Amara away. When he tried to move, his feet stuck to the ground. A robed figure turned to him. It had Zorak's face contorted into a sneer. "This is what happens when you fail," he taunted, voice echoing unnaturally. "You're just an earthling, too weak to save anyone." Orion felt rage and despair boil inside him, but he remembered Amara's words. "They can't really harm you. It's an illusion." Summoning every ounce of will, he forced himself to break free. The sticky sensation on his feet vanished, and he rushed forward, hurling himself at the robed figures. They disintegrated into swirling motes of light the instant he made contact. He stumbled and found himself in a new setting, a more intimate memory. One of his final conversations with Drex in the Coalition cafeteria. Drex had been excited about a breakthrough in cross-genetic engineering. But behind his enthusiasm, Orion now saw an undercurrent of fear he hadn't noticed before. This maze was twisting the memory to highlight every anxious glance Drex had given him. "You never asked the right questions?" Drex's voice echoed, though his lips didn't move. "If you had, maybe I'd still be alive." "I was your friend," Orion said, voice trembling. "I tried to support you in every way I knew." Tears blurred his vision, but he refused to let the illusion consume him. He clenched his fists, feeling the weight of unspoken guilt. Then something clicked in his mind. Friendship also meant forgiveness, both of Drex and of himself. A calm, almost meditative clarity settled over him. "I can't change what happened, but I can protect Rena and Amara now, and I will." The cafeteria scene dissolved like mist in sunlight. In its place came a deep darkness pierced by a single pulsating doorway of light. Orion didn't hesitate. He walked through it, refusing to be trapped by illusions. When his vision cleared, he found himself back in the council chamber, on his knees. Sweat drenched his brow and his heart thundered in his chest. Yet the maze was behind him. A wave of murmurs rippled through the assembled council members. None spoke outright, but their expressions varied from impressed to disapproving. Rena rushed forward to help Orion stand, while Amara hovered nearby, her posture radiating anxious relief. "You made it," Rena said softly, offering him a supportive arm. "How do you feel?" "Exhausted," he replied, gulping down air as though he had run a marathon. "But intact, I think." Zorak descended from the dais, his expression unreadable. The rest of the council looked on, as if waiting for his pronouncement. "You emerged swiftly, Orion Carter," he said in a measured tone. "The illusions of the waste can be devastating. Many remain trapped for hours, some losing their minds entirely." Orion steadied himself, mindful that everyone was still watching. "I had good advice," he said, nodding subtly toward the sisters. Zorak gave an enigmatic half-smile. "Indeed, and I can't deny you completed the trial. The council must therefore recognize your claim as the Rin Shaddai protector." A pause. However, the single word hung in the air like a lead weight. Orion noticed how Zorak's fingers curled slightly, as though restraining some deeper impulse. "Yes, counselor?" he prompted, keeping his voice steady. "However," Zorak continued, "the trial of mental resilience is only one facet. Aravex respects strength of mind, but also strength of body and spirit. The next trial, the trial of protection, will be conducted under more realistic circumstances. We must see how you fare in a genuine threat scenario." He glanced at Rena and Amara. "After all, the safety of these two rests on your abilities." A flicker of challenge sparked in Rena's eyes. "We fought side by side with Orion just last night. How many times must we demonstrate that we can handle ourselves alongside him?" Zorak spread his hands, a gesture of mock benevolence. "Your clan's well-being is a matter of public interest. Many on Aravex have followed the news of your brother's death in the sudden appearance of an Earthling protector." He turned to the council. "Shouldn't the people see for themselves that their new guardian is capable under true duress?" The council members exchanged looks, and Orion's heart sank. This was a political maneuver, plain and simple. Zorak was playing to public opinion. He had turned the maze of deliberations into a spectacle, and now he planned to do the same with the next trial, making Orion's performance a matter of popular scrutiny. Nevertheless, one of the elder counselors nodded. A formal demonstration of his protective skills would quell the murmurs. Let it be broadcast widely, so there is no doubt. "Then it's settled," Zorak said, inclining his head regally. "In 2 days' time, during the Festival of Three Moons, Orion Carter will face the trial of protection. We shall let fate decide if he is worthy." Anger flared in Orion's chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. He remembered that illusions weren't the only threat on Aravex. Political traps were just as dangerous. 2 days, he repeated. "Very well, I accept." Zorak's gaze flicked toward Rena and Amara, his lips curling into something that resembled a sneer. "You would do well to use your remaining time wisely, Earthling. The next test will not be so controlled. The council session ended abruptly, leaving Orion, Rena, and Amara to exit under the watchful eyes of the crowd. Outside, the double suns blazed overhead, their heat adding to Orion's sense of pressure. He couldn't ignore the feeling that Zorak had already begun orchestrating whatever danger lay ahead. That evening, Orion found himself in an enormous training room deep beneath the Rin Shaddai estate. The chamber's walls were made of a special alloy that shifted color under kinetic stress, offering real-time diagnostics of each combat practice. Rena was there as well, dressed in flexible combat gear. Under the ambient glow of the lights, her toned silhouette conveyed a lethal grace. She beckoned Orion forward. "It's not enough that you can short-circuit a few armor suits," she said, sliding into a fighting stance. "If Zorak plans to challenge you physically, you need to learn some fundamental techniques, at least enough to stay alive until I or Amara can intervene." Orion studied Rena's stance, mimicking it as best he could. "I'm all for staying alive," he quipped, though his nerves jangled. "But do you really think Zorak would try something underhanded during a public trial?" Rena's expression darkened. "I know men like him. They enjoy turning a rigged game into a spectacle. Public or private, it doesn't matter. He'll ensure you're in genuine danger, and he'll do it in a way that seems fair on the surface. That's his specialty." She launched a flurry of strikes, slow enough for Orion to track, but fast enough to make him sweat. He raised his arms, remembering a rudimentary defense posture. "Let's hope this helps," he said through gritted teeth. Each blow from her reverberated through his bones, even though she wasn't putting her full strength into it. "It will," Rena replied, pivoting gracefully. "You learn quickly when you're desperate." She landed a swift kick to his abdomen, careful to pull back at the last second. Still, Orion stumbled, gasping for breath. "Again," she ordered. They continued the drills for hours, Rena methodically walking Orion through each maneuver. When to dodge, when to strike, and how to use his lower center of gravity against taller opponents. By the time they were done, Orion's shirt was soaked with sweat, and his arms felt like molten lead. As they wound down, Rena stepped back, letting her hair fall loose from its tight fastening. She studied Orion with a guarded intensity. "You're not worthless in a fight, but you hesitate." He sighed. "I'm an engineer, not a soldier. My mind always wants to calculate the angles, weigh the risks. Sometimes that means I'm slow to act." "It's a liability," Rena said, though her tone was not entirely unkind. "But maybe we can turn it into an asset. When trouble comes, use that mind of yours to see solutions we can't." Orion managed a weak smile. "That's the plan. Believe me, I'd much rather sabotage someone's tech than try to win a slugfest." He flexed his aching shoulders. "Thanks for this, by the way. Even if I'm pretty sure my ribs won't recover for a week." Rena gave a short laugh, the sound surprisingly warm. "I'd say you're welcome, but I suspect you'll be cursing me tomorrow when the bruises set in." She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping. "Still, I admire your persistence. Drex was right. You do have a certain tenacity about you." Before Orion could respond, the training room door hissed open, revealing Amara. She looked between them with a gentle smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting, but there's something you both need to see." Amara led them through winding corridors to a secure lab adjacent to the estate's main data center. The room was ablaze with holo displays and diagnostic scanners, each projecting streams of encoded symbols that Orion only partially understood. The interplay of light gave the space a futuristic glow, yet an undercurrent of tension made the air feel heavy. Sitting in the lab's center was a spherical device, its surface etched with geometric designs. Each line and angle glimmered with faint phosphorescence. Orion recognized it from files Drex had shared at the Coalition. This was the Argus Sphere, a legendary piece of Aravex technology capable of interpreting genetic data on a massive scale. "I thought this was just a myth," Orion breathed, stepping closer. "Drex once mentioned it, a relic from Aravex's earliest experiments in bioengineering." "It's real enough," Amara replied. She tapped a floating control panel, and the sphere rotated, projecting an image in midair. Lines of code spiraled out, forming a helix-like structure Orion guessed was a genetic sequence. Someone tried to access the Argus sphere last night, around the same time we were fighting those intruders. Rhina's eyes narrowed. So the attack on us was a diversion. They wanted this. Or they wanted data from it, Amara corrected. The Argus sphere holds centuries of genetic records. With the right modifications, one could manipulate entire bloodlines. Or worse. Orion recalled the mention of certain Aravex factions who advocated forced genetic purity. It wasn't hard to guess who might be behind it. Zorak, he muttered. He has enough clout to orchestrate an attack under the radar, and he's obsessed with maintaining the so-called integrity of the Aravex genome. Amara nodded gravely. From what the security logs show, there was an attempt to duplicate key genetic data from our family's records, specifically those tied to Drex, Rena, and me. They didn't succeed, but it's troubling that they got as far as they did. Rena's face darkened. No wonder Zorak is so interested in humbling Orion. If he can demonstrate that our house is vulnerable, he could use that as a pretext to seize our genetic records for protection. Then he'd have everything he needs for forced manipulation. Cold fury coiled in Orion's stomach. He's not just testing me, he's setting the stage for a larger power grab. He looked to the Argus sphere. If that data fell into his hands, he could selectively breed or modify entire generations, turning your clan, or any other, into a mere puppet of his designs. Amara shut down the projection. We'll have to defend this technology at all costs. But first, we need to survive the upcoming Festival of Three Moons. The trial is Zorak's next big move, and you can bet he'll escalate. Rena crossed her arms, her jaw set. We should prepare the estate's defenses, double the security. If the last infiltration was any indication, they'll try something even bigger under the cover of the festival's chaos. Orion placed a hand on the Argus sphere, feeling the faint hum of its stored power. Let's show Zorak that we're not so easily cornered. He glanced at both sisters. We'll make his public spectacle backfire. Somehow in the tension and the glow of the lab, he saw a fleeting unity in their expressions, an agreement that, come what may, they would stand together against the looming threat. The next day was a whirlwind of logistical planning and hushed strategy sessions. From the observation decks to the hidden corridors beneath the estate, people bustled around under Rena's direction. She systematically tested the estate's newly fortified security grid, an intricate mesh of biotech sensors and mechanical traps that Orion had helped design. Each time a sensor node lit green, it felt like a small victory in an ongoing war of anticipation. Amara oversaw the coordination between household staff and external allies. Several minor clan leaders, sympathetic to the Rin Shaddai cause, had pledged their support for the Festival of Three Moons. They agreed to keep watchful eyes on the crowds, scanning for any infiltration attempts. Even Alaris, the estate sentinel, seemed to be working overtime, patrolling the perimeter and briefing every guard on best practices for defending against advanced weaponry. Orion spent hours tweaking the estate's neural network, ensuring it wouldn't be susceptible to hacking or sabotage. The nights he'd spent in Earth Labs reverse engineering Aravex technology now served him well. He installed fail-safes that required both his and either Rena's or Amara's biometric signatures to deactivate. That way, no single point of failure could bring down their defenses. At midday, he took a brief respite in one of the estate's smaller gardens, a quiet nook filled with tall, spindly plants whose leaves glowed with subtle pulses. Each pulse seemed to resonate with a gentle trickle of water from a nearby fountain. Orion let the atmosphere calm his racing thoughts. Tomorrow would bring the festival and the trial. Despite his best efforts, anxiety hovered at the edge of his consciousness like a gathering storm. Amara appeared as though drawn by the same need for solitude. Her robes fluttered in a slight breeze, their color shifting from cerulean to lavender in a slow, rhythmic pattern. Without speaking, she settled onto a bench beside him. They listened to the water and the soft rustle of leaves for a long, companionable moment. "You've done so much for us in such a short time," she said eventually, her voice thoughtful. "I worry that we ask too much of you." Orion exhaled, leaning forward. I offered. Drex believed I was the right person, even though I sometimes doubt that myself. He paused, letting his gaze drift to the glowing leaves. But I'm not sure if I'll ever truly belong here. Earth is my home, my sense of humor, my references, My everything. It's all human. And now I'm thrown into the center of a clan power struggle on an alien planet. Her dark eyes soften. Yet you strive to understand us, to defend us. That is more than many would do, even those born into the clan. She reached out, placing a hand over his. Electricity seemed to pass through that touch, a gentle warmth. Belonging is more than shared biology or tradition. It's empathy, unity of purpose. In time, you may find that Aravex has become just as much your home as Earth. The sincerity in her words made Orion's chest tighten. Perhaps it was the stress of imminent danger, or perhaps it was the peaceful hush of the garden, but a deep fondness welled up inside him. He turned his hand to interlace his fingers with hers. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply breathed, heartbeats slowing in unison. "How do you stay so composed?" he finally asked, voice nearly a whisper. Amar offered a bittersweet smile. "I'm not. Inside, I'm terrified of losing more family, of failing my brother's memory. But I've learned to channel fear into determination, to use it as fuel, not let it consume me." Before Orion could respond, they heard footsteps. Rena appeared at the entrance to the garden, her posture tense. "We finished all security checks," she announced, giving Orion a curious glance when she noticed his hand in Amara's. She didn't comment on it, though. "We should rest now while we can. Tomorrow will be busy." As they rose and followed Rena out, Orion's fingers lingered in Amara's for just a second longer than necessary. Something unspoken passed between them, an undercurrent of closeness that had not been there before. Yet neither dared label it, not with the threat of the festival looming and the knowledge that everything could change in a single violent day. When the first moon rose over Aravex on the evening of the Festival of Three Moons, the entire capital city came alive with celebration. Hovering lanterns bobbed and weaved among crystalline towers, each lantern glowing in a riot of colors that matched the festival crowds below. Traditional dances spilled into the streets, accompanied by melodic instruments whose tones echoed along bioluminescent walkways. Vendors lined the avenues, selling everything from swirling Aravex pastries that left luminous trails on the tongue to handcrafted jewelry woven from living vines. Yet beneath the festive exterior, the Rin Shaddai estate braced for conflict. Orion stood with Rena and Amara on a balcony overlooking the main city plaza, which had been cordoned off for the trial of protection. A temporary stage of sorts had been erected, an oval platform ringed by what looked like transparent energy shields, designed to keep participants in and bystanders out. Overhead, colossal screens broadcast the scene for the throngs crowding nearby bridges and terraces. If Zorak's plan was to put on a spectacle, he had succeeded. Nearly half the city seemed to be in attendance, watching and waiting for the performance to begin. From his vantage point, Orion could see Zorak at the far end of the plaza, flanked by several council members and a detachment of uniformed guards. The counselor wore ceremonial robes emblazoned with swirling patterns of silver. He lifted a hand, and through the amplification of the city's sound network, his voice boomed across the plaza. "Citizens of Aravex, welcome to this most auspicious festival. Tonight, under the light of three moons, we gather to observe the trial of protection, a test of skill and bravery for the one who claims the right to guard the Rin Shaddai sisters." Rena's jaw clenched. He's performing for the masses, setting the stage for a rigged confrontation. Amara touched her sister's arm lightly. "Let's see what he's planned. We won't let him corner us." Orion took a steadying breath. He wore a sleeker version of Aravex combat gear, adapted to his size and fitted with extra compartments for the gadgets he'd prepared. Every muscle in his body felt taut with anticipation. Even the swirl of the festival lights and the excited chatter in the streets could not mask the sense of threat that loomed. They descended to the plaza level, moving through a corridor of cheering onlookers who parted for them. Many recognized Rena and Amara, calling out their names in support. A smaller but vocal segment jeered, evidently unimpressed by an Earthborn protector. Orion refused to let it rattle him. He focused on the end goal: thwart Zorak's machinations and secure the future of the Rin Shaddai clan. At last, they reached the oval platform. Zorak stood at the opposite end, his arms extended in a grandiose gesture. Tonight, we shall see if Orion Carter can truly protect Rena and Amara from what threatens them. Will he stand firm against adversity, or will his inadequacies be laid bare? His words reverberated through the hush that fell over the crowd. Orion exchanged a glance with the sisters. Showtime, he thought grimly. If Zorak expected a lamb to the slaughter, he'd find that Orion was ready to rewrite the script. The trial of protection began in a manner Orion hadn't anticipated. A shimmering bubble of energy descended over the oval platform, cutting off the roar of the crowd to a distant murmur. Within this barrier, visual illusions sparked and danced, reminiscent of the maze of deliberations but more complex. Ghostly shapes flickered across the stage, simulations of attackers conjured by advanced projection tech that Aravex used for elite training exercises. Rena immediately took a defensive stance, scanning the illusions for signs of tangibility. Are these real enough to hurt us, or just fancy light shows? She asked, glancing at Orion. Both, he guessed, spotting the faint glint of embedded hardware within the illusions. They're holographic projections, but they can carry stun charges. He pointed to a swirling form that resembled a monstrous beast with luminescent tendrils. As if on cue, the creature lunged, discharging arcs of energy that seared the platform's surface. Amara reacted with calm precision, channeling a protective shield of bioenergy. Her hands moved in elegant arcs, forming a translucent barrier that deflected the blasts. But each strike drained her reserves, and beads of sweat formed on her brow. Orion noticed how the illusions multiplied in number, each new wave more threatening than the last. It was a strategic onslaught meant to overwhelm. Zorak's voice crackled through hidden speakers. A protector must be resourceful, he said, sounding almost bored. If these illusions prove too much, perhaps Earth has nothing to offer Aravex after all. Orion gritted his teeth. Not today, Zorak. He tapped a discreet wrist panel, activating a device he'd embedded in the platform's underside earlier that day. A surge of electromagnetic interference rippled outward, causing the illusions to flicker. Some vanished entirely, disrupted by the field, but the more advanced projections adapted, stabilizing against the interference. Rena seized the opportunity, darting forward and slicing through the illusions that weakened. Her twin energy blades cut arcs of light in the air. With each decisive slash, another projection collapsed. Meanwhile, Orion fine-tuned the EM field on his wrist panel, searching for the frequency that would disable the illusions altogether. Amara stayed near him, hands trembling slightly as she maintained a secondary shield around them both. From the look of fierce concentration in her eyes, Orion knew she was bolstering his efforts with her own form of subtle biotech synergy, perhaps enhancing the resonance of his device. One after another, illusions blinked out, but the strongest ones clung to existence, lashing out with bright tendrils of lethal energy. A flicker of movement caught Orion's eye from the far edge of the barrier. There, Zorak's cloaked attendants were fiddling with a control console, sending new illusions onto the platform. That was the real game, an ever-escalating challenge controlled by Zorak's allies. They could keep generating illusions until Orion and the sisters collapsed from exhaustion. Rena's breathing came in sharp bursts. We can't hold out forever, she warned. We need to. A thunderous crash interrupted her, the ground trembled, and the illusion barrier fractured in one corner. When the distortion cleared, Orion realized they were no longer facing simulated opponents. Genuine attackers in dark, compact armor were bursting through the energy wall, brandishing real plasma rifles. Zorak had escalated the trial into an actual ambush. Pandemonium erupted on the oval platform. The crowd outside the energy barrier gasped, recoiling as the new wave of attackers fired searing beams that ricocheted off the fractured projection walls. Rena charged at the intruders without hesitation, her agility on full display as she weaved between streaks of plasma fire. She struck with ruthless efficiency, slicing off weapon barrels and disabling power packs in quick succession. Amara's shield flickered dangerously under the relentless barrage, but she remained resolute, eyes glowing with an intense concentration. Streams of crackling energy danced around her hands, forging an invisible bulwark that kept the worst of the blast from hitting Orion and the bystanders. Orion's mind raced, searching for a way to dismantle whatever control system was letting these real attackers breach the illusions so freely. He spotted a small black device lodged into the platform's edge, likely a signal amplifier that had piggybacked on his own electromagnetic field. Without waiting, he sprinted toward it. A volley of plasma fire scorched past him, close enough to singe the hem of his combat gear. He reached the device and slammed a compact disruptor coil onto its casing. With a satisfying hiss, the device crackled, short-circuiting. At once, the illusions flickered erratically, some vanishing. But the physical assailants remained, and their numbers continued to climb. Orion guessed they'd been hiding among the festival crowds, waiting for Zorak's signal to move in. Zorak's smug voice boomed again, carried by hidden loudspeakers. "Behold, the Earth Protector's trial escalates. If he cannot defend even himself, how can he defend the Rin Shaddai sisters?" Orion cursed under his breath. He realized Zorak had orchestrated a no-win scenario. If Orion failed to repel the attackers, he'd lose credibility. If he turned the platform into a bloodbath, he'd be seen as too violent for Aravex's traditions. Either way, Zorak stood to gain political clout, painting Orion as either incompetent or barbaric. A flash of silver caught Orion's attention. Rena was in trouble. Two heavily armed attackers had cornered her at the edge of the platform, their rifles trained on her torso. She couldn't deflect both at once. Heart pounding, Orion raced forward, rummaging in his belt pouch for the improvised gadget he'd saved for an emergency. A small spherical contraption, part flashbang, part micro-EMP, would have to do. He lobbed it at the attackers just as they squeezed their triggers. A searing flash erupted, followed by a concussive blast of electromagnetic interference. Both guns sputtered and died, their power cores fried. Rena seized the opening, slicing through one attacker's protective visor with an elegant strike. The other retreated, stumbling away in shock. "Nice timing," Rena gasped, giving Orion a brief nod. Sweat glistened on her brow, and the strain in her voice was palpable. Amara joined them, her own energy reserves clearly running low. "We've got more incoming," she warned, pointing to the stage's perimeter where additional dark-armored figures were climbing through. "And these illusions are about to short out for good. The entire city is watching this chaos." Orion's gaze traveled beyond the barrier. Indeed, every eye seemed riveted on the spectacle. He caught sight of Zorak's face on a floating holoscreen, smirking. "We need a game changer," Orion thought. "We can't win by playing defense alone." With the illusions flickering out, the oval platform became a stark battleground under the glow of three moons. Screams and shouts blended with sizzling plasma bursts, and the barrier itself wavered in places, threatening to collapse altogether. The watchers beyond the perimeter had scattered to safer vantage points, though many remained enthralled to the unfolding drama. In the midst of the chaos, Orion spotted an opportunity. Zorak's lackeys were funneling onto the stage from two main entry points, both near large generator units that powered the projection barrier. If those generators were disabled, the entire barrier would fail, which might allow the city's sentinel forces to flood in and restore order. Right now, the barrier acted like a cage that kept the fight contained, just as Zorak likely intended. "Cover me," Orion shouted to Rena and Amara over the din, gesturing at the generator stations. The sisters exchanged a quick glance, then nodded. They advanced together, forging a path through the attackers with lethal coordination. Rena with her twin blades, Amara with dazzling arcs of bioenergy. It was mesmerizing to watch them fight in tandem, each compensating for the other's weaknesses, each instinctively knowing where the other would strike next. Orion sprinted to the first generator, where a pair of heavily armored adversaries guarded the humming console. He slid behind a shattered projection node for cover, rummaging in his belt for another gadget. The guards noticed him, rifles swiveling in his direction. Orion's throat went dry. No time for subtlety, he told himself. He fashioned a quick override plug using wires from his multi-tool. Then, with a burst of adrenaline, he lunged out of cover, jammed the makeshift plug into the generator's auxiliary port, and hammered the override switch on his wrist panel. The console sparked in protest. One of the guards fired a shot that grazed Orion's arm, burning through fabric and singeing skin. He bit down a cry of pain, forcing the generator's power cycle into a catastrophic short. A high-pitched whine filled the air, and the entire generator shook violently. The guard who had shot Orion stumbled backward, stunned by a blast of surging energy that erupted from the console hall. Sparks danced across the platform's surface. A sudden hush descended as the barrier around the stage sputtered and dropped in that section, letting in a gust of cool night air and the city's sentinel forces who had been waiting for an opening. Simultaneously, from the second generator, a brilliant flash signaled Rena and Amara's success in disabling that unit as well. Within moments, both illusions and barrier were gone, replaced by the riotous swirl of festival lights and the thunderous arrival of official security squads. The watchers who had fled now edged closer again, peering to see how this unscripted drama would conclude. Zorak, high on a nearby dais, snarled in frustration. He barked commands to his personal guard, but the city's sentinel enforcers were already pouring into the plaza, detaining the dark-armored attackers. An uneasy silence descended, broken only by the crackle of damaged electronics. Orion, bleeding from his arm, locked eyes with Rena and Amara, relief flickering through him. They had turned Zorak's spectacle into his public embarrassment. As the dust settled, the hush of the crowd shifted into an uproar of voices. Some cheered, recognizing that Orion and the Rin Shaddai sisters had thwarted what amounted to a coup in miniature. Others jeered or whispered in alarm, uncertain how to process the fact that one of their esteemed council members had orchestrated a dangerous ambush during a sacred festival. Zorak tried to regain control, stepping forward with his robes swirling dramatically around him. "People of Aravex," he called in a booming voice. "These events are regrettable. I attempted to test Orion Carter under safe, controlled circumstances, but traitorous elements exploited this trial to launch a vicious attack." He spread his arms, adopting a performative tone of sorrow and indignation. "Let us not forget, I stood for your safety." Rhina scoffed audibly. Her voice, though quieter, carried the weight of fury. "You're lying through your teeth, Zorak. You engineered this entire fiasco, just like you tried to steal data from the Argus sphere and push your agenda of forced genetic manipulation. We have the records to prove it." The crowd reacted sharply to that accusation, gasping and turning anxious eyes to Zorak. He visibly faltered for an instant, but quickly masked it with a cold glare. "Baseless slander," he hissed. "No Earthborn meddler can prove such claims." A firm voice cut through the chaos. "But we can." Into the open space strode Alaris, the sentinel who had escorted Orion upon his first arrival. Alongside him walked several prominent clan leaders who had pledged loyalty to the Rin Shaddai. They carried holotablets displaying incriminating data, time-stamped logs of Zorak's communications with mercenaries, hacked security footage that showed him giving orders to sabotage the festival's illusions, and partial downloads from the Argus Sphere's system attempts. Alaris held the tablet aloft for the assembled crowd. "We gleaned this information by accessing the estate's upgraded security network. Every step of Zorak's plan is documented. His betrayal of the council, his assault on the Rin Shaddai clan, and his efforts to spark fear among the populace for political gain." A collective murmur of shock swept through the crowd. Cameras from media drones circled overhead, broadcasting the evidence citywide. Zorak's face drained of color. He bared his teeth in rage, lunging at Alaris with unexpected speed. But Rena was faster. She intercepted Zorak, twisting his arm behind his back and forcing him to his knees before he could land a blow. Applause and cheers broke out from onlookers. Even the Sentinel forces seemed momentarily stunned by Rena's swift efficiency. "Zorak of the High Council," announced a newly arrived official, an elder stateswoman who had remained on the outskirts of the confrontation. "You stand accused of sedition, conspiracy, and attempted murder. You will be taken into custody to await trial." Zorak spat curses but was quickly muzzled and bound by the Sentinel squad. The festival crowd erupted into a cacophony of relief, anger, and triumph all at once. Drones buzzed overhead, capturing every angle of the scandal. As Zorak was led away, Orion felt an immense weight lift from his chest, though the pain in his wounded arm flared anew. Amara hurried to Orion's side, pressing a healing hand against his seared flesh. Rena, still breathing hard, shot him a faint, relieved grin. "Looks like you passed your trial," she said, her voice carrying both pride and lingering adrenaline. "And so did we." In the following weeks, The shockwaves of Zorok's arrest rippled across Aravex. He had not operated alone, and multiple investigations unearthed a network of like-minded conspirators. With each arrest, more evidence surfaced about a plan to reshape Aravex's population under a rigid, xenophobic doctrine, one that viewed alliances with off-worlders as a threat. Yet the damage had been contained, thanks largely to Orion's role in exposing the conspiracy during the Festival of Three Moons. Meanwhile, the Rin Shaddai sisters found their public standing soared in the aftermath. Sympathy for their ordeal mingled with genuine admiration for how they had fought, both on the platform and behind the scenes. Even the more conservative clans showed respect, if only because Rena and Amara had stood unwavering in the face of Aravex's darkest political undercurrents. The council, shaken by Zorok's betrayal, ratified Orion Carter's status as the official protector of the Rin Shaddai clan. Word spread quickly through the capital's networks. The first human to hold such a title was here to stay. Some grumbled that it was a breach of tradition. Others hailed it as a sign of progress, a blending of Earth's ingenuity with Aravex's ancient heritage. For Orion, the days blurred together with negotiations, meetings, and an avalanche of new responsibilities. He and the sisters had to formalize their triad bond under Aravex law, which required a series of rituals combining legal, cultural, and deeply personal elements. The idea of being tied in an official marital sense to Rena and Amara still made his head spin at times. Yet every step forward felt less like an alien obligation and more like an affirmation of the closeness they had forged through trust, hardship, and mutual respect. The legal ceremony took place in the Grand Hall of Unity, a towering edifice built from translucent crystal that refracted the planet's dual sunlight into rainbows. It was a far cry from any wedding Orion had imagined back on Earth. A throng of onlookers filled the chamber, from clan leaders to curious citizens. Even representatives from Earth's interplanetary coalition were in attendance, some wearing stunned expressions at the scale and splendor of Aravex ceremonies. Rhina stood resplendent in an outfit that fused warrior motifs with formal robes, sleek lines of polished metal over shimmering fabric. Amara, in more traditional attire, wore layered robes that changed color with each step, displaying swirling patterns akin to living constellations. Orion's formal garb was simpler, a blend of Aravex fabrics and earth cuts. The highlight was a sash embroidered with the intertwined symbols of his birth world and his new clan. An elder from the council presided, reading passages from Aravex's oldest texts about the meaning of unity, protection, and shared destiny. Though Orion understood only snippets of the archaic language, he could sense the ceremony's gravity. When the elder motioned for them to join hands, he felt a jolt of solemn pride at the contact, Rena's firm, calloused grip and Amara's soft, reassuring warmth on either side. A hush fell. "Under the laws of the Rin Shaddai clan," the elder proclaimed, "we affirm this union of protector and family. May their bonds serve not only themselves but all of Aravex, uniting tradition with innovation, strength with compassion." With that pronouncement, a wave of applause filled the Hall of Unity. Light refracted from the crystals overhead, casting rainbow shards that danced across Orion's vision. He turned toward Rena and Amara, heart thudding with emotion. They each offered him a gentle smile, and in that moment he felt something transcendent, a shared spark of destiny that bound them, forging a bridge across worlds. Over the following months, the transition from ceremonial union to everyday reality proved both challenging and exhilarating. Political tensions lingered, but the clan's renewed security measures and Orion's alliances with outside supporters kept potential threats at bay. Meanwhile, Rena drilled her new security recruits, combining Earth tactics with Aravex martial arts in a groundbreaking training program. Amara delved deeper into her healing and bioenergy studies, working with Earth scientists to pioneer medical breakthroughs that married both planets' expertise. As for Orion, he split his time between reinforcing the estate's technological defenses and building new connections to Earth. The interplanetary coalition showed heightened interest in Aravex, and Orion became an unofficial ambassador, proof that collaboration across worlds could yield astonishing results. Each day brought fresh hurdles, but also fresh insights into how Earth and Aravex might learn from each other, weaving a more interconnected future. In quieter moments, they found space for domestic life, however unconventional it was. Orion learned the subtle joys of sharing breakfast while discussing council politics, or practicing meditation with Amara amid glowing Aravex flora, or sparring with Rena on a moonlit terrace. Their bond evolved from necessity into something deeper, richer, and unquestionably real. They even joked that two wives are at least twice as challenging, but the warmth in their eyes betrayed a profound affection beneath the humor. Everything changed yet again when Amara discovered she was pregnant, a development that surprised even her, given the rare genetic interplay of human and Aravex DNA. A joyful shockwave rippled through the household. Rena, at once anxious and elated, began fussing over prenatal care protocols. Orion vacillated between stunned euphoria and protective worry, especially when the doctors confirmed that genetic blending from Earth and Aravex might yield unique traits. And so the bond that began under duress expanded further, now carrying the promise of new life. As the triple moon shone down on the Rin Shaddai estate one serene night, Orion found himself gazing at the star-laden sky, a hand resting on Amara's gentle curve of a belly. Rena stood beside him, quietly solemn, her arm looped around his waist. In that instant, he felt the gravitational pull of destiny. Aravex had become his home, his responsibility, and the place where he would welcome a child that bridged two worlds. Whatever new challenges awaited them, be they political, cultural, or personal, the path forward was theirs to shape, step by step, together. Looking back on this journey, one truth stands out. Trust, unity, and open-minded cooperation can transcend even the most rigid boundaries, be they planetary or personal. Orion's transformation from hesitant outsider to beloved protector shows how courage and collaboration spark incredible change. Rena and Amara, once facing exile within their own homeland, now stand strong alongside a partner who understands their culture yet offers fresh perspective. Their tale brims with promise, forging a family that's equal parts tradition and innovation, unafraid to break molds in pursuit of shared harmony. I believe it's a testament to what people and aliens can achieve by embracing their differences rather than fearing them. What are your thoughts? Did their trials inspire you or raise questions about identity and belonging? Share your opinions in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. After all, every great story deserves an even greater community to discuss it.